My son took me on a father-son trip to Alaska, then left me for dead in bear country. He packed the truck while I slept, loaded every piece of gear, then drove off without a word. No food, no phone, no way out. Just the cold, the wolves, and his final words. Maybe you'll make it, maybe you won't. Before we get started, please press subscribe button and write down a comment where you watching from. They say the wilderness reveals who a man truly is. I suppose that's why Mason brought me to Alaska. It started with a phone call I didn't expect. My son hadn't spoken to me in days, not since he stormed into my office demanding $5,000 like I was a human ATM. The fight was loud, ugly. I still remember the vein twitching in his temple as he shouted that I'd ruined his life with control and expectations. Now here he was, chipper on the line like nothing happened. "Hey, Dad," he said. I was thinking, what if we did a father-son trip again? Just us, like old times. Denali National Park. I nearly dropped the phone. Mason hadn't gone near the woods since Sarah passed. When he was a boy, we used to camp every summer. Olympic, Glacier, once even Yellowstone. I taught him to make fires, pitch tents, recognize the claw marks of a bear on a tree. Then Sarah got sick. After she was gone, Mason turned in on himself. I tried to fill the hole with tuition, cars, allowances, whatever kept him smiling. I thought maybe this was the breakthrough. Maybe my son was reaching back towards something real. He insisted everything was booked. Flights, permits, gear. My buddies canceled, and I thought, why waste it? You'll love it, Dad. 5 days off grid, just like when I was a kid. His voice was a little too bright. The kind of brightness that puts a crack in your gut before you know why. Still, I said yes. 3 days later, we were boarding a plane in Seattle. Mason bounced on his heels like a teenager wearing a brand new camping pack with the tag still flapping off the zippers. He joked about fresh air and no cell service, thank God, while scrolling on his phone every 10 minutes. Something in my stomach was already twisting. I tried not to dwell on it. I reminded myself this was a chance to repair. Maybe even to forgive. We landed in Anchorage, then drove north in a rental 4Runner. Mason navigated, watching the road signs like a man with a plan. We stopped at a supply store where he bought extra rope, flashlights and flares. Far more than a casual camper would need. The clerk raised an eyebrow. Planning to get lost? Mason just laughed. Just want to be prepared. The phrase stuck in my head like a splinter. We reached the lodge near Denali by nightfall. Rustic place, pine walls, stone fireplace, smelled like cedar and melted snow. Mason studied the trail maps obsessively, tracing a route deep into the backcountry. Tlanica River, remote, no cell service, no people. Exactly what we need. I hesitated. That's rough terrain, bear country. I remember everything you taught me, he said. Besides, you're the survival expert. I laughed a little, not because it was funny, because something felt off, and I didn't want to see it. Ranger Walsh briefed us in the morning. Sharp woman, ex-military, eyes like searchlights. She gave Mason a long look when he asked about the most isolated route. You two sure you're up for that? She asked. We're experienced, Mason answered before I could. I signed the waivers, rented a Remington 870 just in case. Packed my bag the old way, even weight, emergency rations, waterproof layers. Mason's pack bulged awkwardly. He winced when I adjusted the straps. Old shoulder injury, he said. I wanted to believe him. The next morning, we left the lodge. Mason grinned as we passed the last cell tower. Off the grid now, Dad. Just us and nature. The words should have been comforting. Instead, they felt like a warning. If this kind of storytelling speaks to you, feel free to subscribe or drop a thought in the comments. I'd appreciate hearing where you're listening from. We parked at the end of a dirt road, where weathered wooden posts marked the boundary of the last drivable mile. From there, the wilderness took over, a trailhead barely visible beneath the frost-bitten underbrush and the shadows of towering spruce. I remember stepping out, the crunch of gravel under my boots. Mason fumbled with his gear, cursing under his breath. Jesus, this thing weighs a ton. Proper packing takes practice, I said, adjusting the straps on his shoulders. He flinched. That same shoulder again. You sure you're not injured? Old sports thing, he muttered. It's nothing. We hiked in silence after that, the forest swallowing our words. Dense and cold, the kind of quiet that wraps around your ankles like wet rope. Snow clung to tree limbs overhead, softening sound, muffling every crunch of our boots. Somewhere off-trail, wolves howled, distant but real. Mason's head snapped in that direction. You okay? I asked. Yeah, he said too quickly. Just forgot how real it gets out here. Funny thing for someone who insisted on maximum isolation. We hiked for 3 hours, found a clearing beside a frozen creek with good sight lines in all directions. I scanned for animal sign, fresh moose tracks, maybe bear scat, hard to say. Mason dropped onto a fallen log, panting. How much farther? This is it for tonight, I told him. We'll push deeper tomorrow. Setting up camp was illuminating. While I tied off a food cache 12 feet in the air, he was still untangling his guy lines. Tent poles clattered, stakes bent. The man who supposedly planned this trip couldn't even clip a rainfly without it sagging. Can you help? He asked, holding the tangled nylon like it was a dead animal. I helped. Of course I did. That's what fathers do, even when the questions start to pile up like snowdrifts. After dark, the fire felt like a confession booth. Shadows danced across Mason's face while I boiled coffee over a small stove. I tried to ease us into something familiar. Remember Yellowstone? You were 10. Insisted on roasting marshmallows until they were charcoal. Mom loved that trip, he said, staring into the flames. She said camping brought out the best in people. Yeah, I said softly. She did. There was a pause. Then he looked up and said, Tell me about your childhood, Dad, before the business. What was it like growing up poor? That caught me off guard. Mason never asked about my life. I told him briefly about growing up in Montana, summers on the harvest crews, shoveling grain, patching fence, no backup plans, no inheritance. Just your own 2 hands. Sounds hard, he said, but there was no empathy in his voice, just calculation. Hard work builds character, I replied. Teaches you what things are worth. He nodded slow. Lucky for me, right? Getting to skip all that. His tone didn't sit right. I couldn't tell if it was sarcasm or resentment. Maybe both. We talked more about the Navy, about survival school, how to navigate with moss and starlight, how to gut a fish and scare off a bear. He asked questions, too many. The kind that weren't about bonding. They were about gathering data. How do you tell when someone's lying to you? He asked, eyes flickering with firelight. Body language, inconsistencies. Lack of detail, I said. Why? He shrugged. Just curious. You're good at reading people. Later, when I banked the fire and zipped into my sleeping bag, Mason offered to take first watch. Not tired yet, he said. Want to enjoy the quiet. That was the moment it clicked. Something deep in my gut finally screamed. Mason never enjoyed silence, never volunteered for anything that didn't have a reward attached. I lay in my tent, listening to the forest sounds, and then to the absence of them. No more footsteps, no shifting near the fire. Just stillness. Patient. Watching. Not keeping watch. Waiting. By morning, I was already awake. Years of military life never fully leave your bones. Especially not when something's off. The light filtered through the tent flap, pale and cold. I could see my breath before I even unzipped the door. What I saw next cemented everything. Mason was by the truck, our only way back to civilization. And he was packing it. Fast, focused, methodical, like a man racing a clock. The fire was out, gear was disappearing, even the food containers. Every single piece of survival equipment loaded up, quietly, deliberately. I stepped out into the cold and said, "What's going on?" He jumped, startled like a kid caught sneaking out. "Getting ready to leave," he said. We planned 3 more days. "Change of plans," he said without looking at me. "Weather's turning." I looked up. Clear skies just like the Rangers forecast. Crisp blue, no clouds. The lie wasn't even careful. "Mason, talk to me. What's really happening here?" That's when it all snapped. He turned and I saw it. Years of restraint breaking open behind his eyes. No filter, no guilt. "You want to know what's happening? I'm done, Dad. Done with your control. With your manipulation. With your constant judgment." His fists were clenched, his jaw tight. But his voice stayed calm in the way that lets you know it's been building a long time. I stepped toward him. "I don't understand." "Don't call me son," he snapped. "Sons don't have to beg their fathers for every dollar while they sit on a fortune. Sons don't have to earn love in monthly deposits. I've given you everything." "No," he said, his voice cracking. "You gave me dependence, and you called it love. You made me weak so you could stay the hero." I felt like I'd been punched. He slammed the tailgate shut. The sound echoed against the trees. "You kept me small, Dad. Controlled every part of my life. School, jobs, money. Like you wanted me to fail without you." "That's not true." "It doesn't matter because now I'm taking control." It landed. The real reason we were here. The real reason he'd chosen Alaska. Why he'd asked about inheritance. Why he'd taken me 30 miles off grid. "You're planning to leave me here," I said. He smiled without warmth. "Very good." I staggered back a step, the cold no longer from the wind. "Mason, this is bear country. No food, no gear." "That's a death sentence." He shrugged. "Maybe you'll make it. You're the survival expert, right?" His voice went soft then, almost kind. "Or maybe you won't. Either way, I get the shops, the house, everything." I couldn't breathe. "I'm your father." "Were," he said. "Now you're just a problem in the woods." He climbed into the truck. I tried to speak. Anything. To reason. To plead. But the door slammed shut before I could form a word. The engine roared, the tires spat dirt. Through the windshield I saw his face. Stone. Unmoving. Then he was gone. Dust rising behind him, dissolving into spruce and silence. I stood in the middle of that dirt road, watching the place where my son disappeared. The boy I'd raised, the boy I'd buried his mother with. The boy I'd built a future for. Now driving away like it was a business decision. He wanted me dead. And he thought it would be easy. But Mason forgot one thing. I survive. That's what I do. The dust from Mason's truck was still hanging in the air when instinct took over. Shock is a luxury you can't afford in bear country. Not when you're 30 miles from the nearest paved road with no food, no map, no gear. First rule of survival: assess your resources. I patted my pockets. House keys, wallet, a folding knife I'd forgotten I even had. One decent layer under my jacket. Boots built for Seattle rain, not Alaskan spring snow. Second rule: evaluate the terrain. The trail was remote, elevation climbing. Tree cover was dense, old-growth spruce and cottonwood. And somewhere out there, wolves. Possibly bears. Ranger Walsh had warned us about cub sightings near this region, which meant there was likely a mother nearby. Third rule: move. Standing still in this environment is a death sentence. Mason hadn't driven straight back toward the lodge. He'd taken a curve in the road that veered southeast. But I'd spotted a faint trail branching off earlier, an animal path cutting through the brush. Game trails usually led to water, and water meant life. I backtracked, boots crunching over frost-hardened earth until I found it. Narrow, uneven, lined with broken twigs and frozen moss. The kind of trail a moose would carve out of routine. I followed it. Every step felt heavier than the last, my legs reminding me that I wasn't 25 anymore. My right knee barked like it did after long shifts under car lifts. But adrenaline kept me moving, not just fear, rage. Rage at what Mason had done, at what I'd let him become, at the quiet voice in the back of my mind whispering that maybe some of this was my fault. A mile in, I found running water, cold and clean, bubbling over rocks slick with green algae. I dropped to my knees and drank straight from the stream, hands trembling. Then I stood, wiped my mouth, and kept going. There were signs of bear activity, claw marks on birch trunks, a torn-up log that looked freshly scavenged for grubs. Scat, too, large and fresh. I made noise as I walked, talked to the trees, sang an old Navy cadence under my breath. Anything to give the local wildlife time to steer clear. After maybe 2 hours, I could have been more. Time moves strange out there. I heard it. Engines, not a truck. Smaller. Rhythmic, humming over terrain. ATVs. I moved fast, ignoring branches slapping my face, boots catching on roots. My lungs burned from cold and panic. I broke through the tree line into a small clearing, and there they were. 4 riders parked beside their machines, pulling off helmets and drinking coffee from thermoses. They turned as I stumbled into view. I must have looked like hell. Scratched, pale, breathing hard. The bearded one, maybe 45, sharp eyes and outdoor gear that wasn't store-bought trendy, stepped forward. "Sir, are you okay? What happened?" "My son," I gasped. "He left me out here. Took everything. The gear, the food, the car." The group exchanged glances. That's attempted murder," the bearded one said. "I'm Oliver Reed, former ranger. These are my buddies. We're doing a backcountry tour." Another handed me a water bottle. "How long ago?" 4 hours, maybe more." Oliver didn't hesitate. "We're getting you out of here. There's a ranger trail nearby. We can get you to the lodge in 90 minutes. Maybe beat him back." The implication took a moment to land. "Get back before Mason. Be waiting when he arrives." I looked at the men standing around me and strangers who didn't know me a thing, and nodded. "Let's move." Oliver's ATV roared to life beneath us as we took off down a narrow trail barely wide enough for the tires. The forest blurred past, tall spruce closing in on both sides, snowbanks hugging the shaded turns. He handled the machine like it was part of him. I held on tight, knuckles white, heart steadying now with every mile we put behind us. "You said he left you out there with nothing?" he shouted over the engine. 30 miles from the ranger station. Took everything. Said, "Go meet the grizzlies." Oliver didn't say anything right away. His jaw clenched. "That's not abandonment," he said finally. "That's calculated." I nodded. He knew what he was doing. We bounced over a frozen stream bed, the wheels skidding just slightly before catching again. The others followed in single file. No one asked questions. No one doubted. There's something different about wilderness people. Maybe because they understand how quickly nature will kill the unprepared. Out here, intent matters. You leave someone behind in bear country, that's not carelessness. That's a decision. I couldn't stop thinking about the motel, the front desk, our room. If we made good time, and if Mason took the long road back, we'd beat him. Oliver confirmed it. He's probably taking Highway 3 down toward Anchorage. That's 6 hours with gas stops. We'll get you there before 9. We reached a rise where the snowpack gave way to gravel. Over the ridge, a paved road shimmered in the distance. Denali Lodge Motel stood like a mirage, log-sided and perfectly still. No rental truck in sight. We'd won the race. Oliver pulled into the gravel lot and cut the engine. The silence afterward rang in my ears. "You sure you don't want to call the police right away?" he asked. "Not yet," I said. "I want to see his face." Inside, the lobby was quiet. Same front desk clerk. Older woman, silver hair, half-moon glasses. She barely raised an eyebrow when I asked for an adjacent room. "We get all kinds up here," she said, sliding over the key. "You want coffee?" I nodded. "Strong if you've got it." Back in our room, I laid the papers out on the desk. The ones I'd brought from Seattle, the will I'd updated 3 weeks ago when Mason had first accused me of ruining his life. At the time, I'd thought I was just being dramatic, just angry. I'd made everything go to charity, conservation, veterans groups, a scholarship fund in Sarah's name. Now it felt like prophecy. Oliver sat beside me, setting up his camera gear. Microphones, digital backup. "Everything will be recorded," he said. "Full audio and visual." I checked my phone. 1 bar of service. Just enough to call my attorney in Seattle. He answered on the second ring. "It's time," I said. "File it tomorrow." Understood. Now Mason would walk into a room he believed would be empty. And instead he'd find everything waiting. Me, alive. The will, signed. His betrayal, documented. No more manipulation. No more excuses. He wanted my death to make him rich. Now it would leave him broke. By 8:15 p.m., the room was set. Legal documents neatly arranged on the desk. My name on every page, his absence echoing in every line. Oliver sat in the adjoining room with his equipment. Camera focused through the cracked door, microphone hidden under a folded towel on the counter. My phone rested beside me, screen lit with 911 pre-dialed and ready, and I was calm, not angry anymore, not even afraid. Just settled. It's strange what survival does to you. The moment I walked out of that forest alive, something inside shifted. I wasn't the same man who boarded the plane in Seattle. That man was still trying to earn his son's love. The man sitting here now, he was finished negotiating with ghosts. At 8:47, I heard it. Tires on gravel, a door slam, boots on wooden steps. The key scratched against the motel room lock. Once, twice. Then it clicked. Mason stepped inside. He looked around, expecting emptiness. When he saw me sitting at the desk, alive, uninjured, very much present, his body jolted like someone had punched him in the gut. "Dad?" he choked. "What? How are you?" "Good evening, Mason." His face cycled through shock, confusion, and a flicker of pure panic. How did you get back?" "Turns out the wilderness community's a little more compassionate than you accounted for. Also turns out I still remember how to survive." His eyes darted toward the bed, the window, the door. "Where's the truck?" he asked. I didn't answer, just nodded at the desk. "Why don't you sit?" Dad, listen, this isn't what it looks like." "No," I cut in. "It's exactly what it looks like. And you're going to listen now." He froze. "You planned it," I said. "The isolation, the extra gear, the sudden invitation after years of nothing. You picked Denali because you knew it was far enough from help. You left me 30 miles into bear country with nothing but the clothes on my back and a folding knife. You wanted a body, Mason. A body with no gear, no signs of struggle. Just a wilderness tragedy." You plan to report me missing sometime tomorrow. Maybe play the grieving son card. Say I wandered off in the night. An accident? Maybe the cold took me. Maybe a bear. Who could say?" His mouth opened and closed. I slid the documents across the desk. You really should have asked about the will before trying to kill me. He stared at the cover page, read the words. His eyes widened. No, he said. No, you can't do this. I already did. 3 weeks ago, after our last fight. You changed the will? Everything now goes to charity. Sarah's name lives on in scholarship funds, not through your bank account. He stepped forward, hands out. Dad, you don't mean this. We can talk. I stood. Sit down, Mason. He flinched, not at my tone, at my certainty. He knew something was different. For once I wasn't trying to win his approval, I was telling the truth, and the truth carried weight. The kind that doesn't need yelling to make itself heard. Mason sat slowly like a man being lowered into a courtroom witness box. His hands trembled. His eyes scanned the room like it held hidden exits. You don't understand, he said quietly. You don't know what it was like growing up with you. I leaned against the dresser. Enlighten me. You controlled everything. Every school application, every dollar, every decision I made. You were right there judging it. I was parenting you, I said. I thought that's what I was supposed to do after Sarah died. No, he snapped. You were managing me like one of your employees. I was never good enough unless I made decisions you agreed with. So, yeah, I took the allowance. I played the role because it was the only way to survive under you. You were 28, I said. Not 8. You didn't want to survive. You wanted to coast. His face reddened. You never trusted me to do anything on my own. Because you never did anything on your own. Silence dropped between us like a curtain. He looked at the legal documents again. So that's it? You're cutting me out completely? I crossed my arms. I didn't cut you out because you failed. I cut you out because you tried to murder your father for money. That's not an inheritance issue. That's a felony. He looked at the floor, then back up at me. Something desperate in his expression now. Okay, let's say it was a mistake. A horrible mistake. I panicked. I thought maybe if you had a scare, you'd finally see what you put me through. I wasn't thinking clearly. You spent weeks planning a 5-day wilderness route and bought emergency flares you never intended to use. That's not panic. That's intent. He stood. You think this is justice? Leaving your only son with nothing after all these years? I think it's the first time I've made a decision based on reality instead of guilt. Guilt? For trying to be both parents, for never letting you face consequences, for handing you things I had to fight for. He took a shaky step toward me. Dad, please, we can fix this. I'll change. Just give me a chance. I looked him in the eyes, the same eyes Sarah used to trace with her fingers when he was a baby. Back when we thought love was enough to shape a child. You had your chance, I said, and you used it to leave me for dead. He sat back down hard, defeated. The motel room was quiet except for the buzz of the overhead light and the soft mechanical click from the next room where Oliver's camera was still rolling. I picked up my phone and hovered over the call button. Mason stared at it. No, he said. Dad, don't. I didn't move. Prison will ruin me, he said. I'll have nothing left. You were willing to give me less than that. He didn't have a response. Only silence. That silence was the most honest thing he'd said all night. I pressed the button. Not hard, just enough to connect. The line rang once, twice, then the Anchorage Police Department picked up. I gave my name, my location, and then 4 words I never thought I'd say. My son tried to kill me. I didn't look at Mason as I spoke. Just watched the desk where our motel coffee cups sat untouched, still half full, cooling in silence. They said an officer would arrive within the hour. When I hung up, Mason finally stood. Not fast, just enough to seem in control. His eyes had gone flat. That calculating flicker was back, the one I'd first seen when he stepped off the plane and scanned Denali like a chessboard. "So, this is it," he said. "It is." "You really think I'm a monster, don't you?" "No," I replied. I think you became one. Slowly. Over time. I just didn't see it." He picked up the documents on the desk. The will, the business transfer revocations, the trust now earmarked for scholarships and conservation. "You spent 20 years grooming me to need you, then blamed me when I never learned how to live without you." I didn't argue. I let the words hang, because parts of them were true. Mason had always been clever, persuasive, and I'd always wanted to believe the best, that his failures were temporary, his entitlement a phase. I thought if I just held on a little longer, we'd get through it. But we didn't, because he didn't want to. The door knocked at 9:23 p.m. sharp. Mason jumped. Oliver opened the adjoining door first and stepped into view. Camera gear in hand, expression calm but unreadable. He nodded toward me. "You want me to answer it?" I nodded. 2 uniformed officers stood in the hall. One male, one female. Both carried the look of professionals who'd seen more broken families than they cared to remember. "Mr. Harper?" the woman asked. "That's me," I said. I stepped aside. Mason didn't run. He didn't yell. He didn't even resist when they read him his rights. He just kept staring at me, eyes locked as if trying to burn something into my memory. "Please," he said once, "don't do this." But it wasn't a plea, not really. It was the sound of a man trying one last time to manipulate the story. "You already did," I said softly. They cuffed him, walked him out. Oliver shut the door behind them. For the first time all day, I exhaled fully. It was done. My son was gone. Not because I pushed him away, but because he made a choice I could no longer explain away. And in that silence that followed, standing in that plain motel room with its sagging curtains and faded wallpaper, I realized the most painful truth of all. Sarah would have seen this coming. The next morning I stood in the quiet motel room, staring at the empty bed across from mine. Mason's bed. Sheets still wrinkled. His hoodie thrown over the chair like he'd just stepped out for coffee. But he wouldn't be back. I sat by the window and watched the light spill across the parking lot, painting long shadows behind the Ranger green 4Runner we'd rented together. Just 2 days ago, I thought that vehicle would carry memories. Now it carried evidence. My phone buzzed. It was Detective Sarah Martinez, the officer who'd met us at the Anchorage station the night before. "We've reviewed the evidence," she said. "The video, your statement, Mr. Reed's account. There's more than enough to move forward." "What happens next?" I asked. "There'll be formal charges filed by the DA this morning. Attempted murder, reckless endangerment, inheritance fraud. Alaska doesn't take wilderness abandonment lightly." I'd looked down at my hands, the calluses from engine work, the scar on my left thumb from a timing belt job 15 years ago. The life I'd built from nothing. The one I'd nearly handed to someone who tried to erase me. Detective Martinez's voice softened. "Will you be returning to Seattle soon?" "Tomorrow," I said, "but not before I finish one more thing." After I hung up, I called my attorney. "It's time," I said. He didn't need me to explain. The new will, the estate changes, all of it would be filed by the end of the day. Every asset once earmarked for Mason, my home, the auto shops, the investment accounts, now had a new future. Half would fund wildlife preservation in Alaska. The rest would be split between a veterans therapy program and the Sarah Harper Scholarship for Disadvantaged Youth. Mason hadn't just lost his inheritance. He'd created something greater in trying to steal it. Later that afternoon, Oliver picked me up and drove us into downtown Anchorage. We sat in a coffee shop on 4th Avenue. Locals in flannel and wind-burnt skin talked about weather and gear, about snowpack levels and incoming storms. "Do you want to see him?" Oliver asked quietly. I stirred cream into my coffee. "No, the boy I raised doesn't exist anymore." He nodded, didn't push. Men like us don't need long explanations. "What happens now?" he asked. "I go home. I start again. I run my business like I always have. But this time, I do it with my eyes open." Oliver sipped his coffee and looked out the window. "You ever want to come back to Alaska for the right reasons? Fishing, real camping, quiet? Give me a call. First trip's on me." I smiled. "Why would you offer that after everything?" "Because you survived something that should have broken you. And instead of turning bitter, you chose to build something better. That's worth a second trip." We shook hands in the parking lot, and he gave me a small card. His name, his number, no email, no website. Just the way I liked it. Back at the motel, I started packing. Each shirt folded with more clarity than I'd felt in years. Each item placed with intention. There was no victory in this. Only truth. And that truth came with a strange kind of peace. I flew back to Seattle the next morning. The sky over Anchorage was clean and blue. That deceptive kind of cold where the sun shines but your breath still ghosts out in clouds. Mason hadn't written, hadn't called. Part of me expected he might, from a jail phone. One last pitch. A desperate swing at sympathy. But the silence was louder than any apology he could have faked. At SeaTac, I picked up my truck from long-term parking, the same one I'd built out myself after Sarah passed. A project to keep my hands busy when grief threatened to swallow the house. The engine turned over on the first try like it had just been waiting for me to come home. Driving through the city felt surreal, as if nothing had changed and I'd put everything had. The skyline still cut jagged against the fall haze. Traffic still bottlenecked at the I-5 split. And my shop, Harper Automotive on 35th and Alki, still stood just as I'd left it. Only now, it no longer belonged to Mason's future. I parked in back, unlocked the side door, and stepped into the garage. The familiar smell of motor oil, coolant, and hot metal hit me like a memory. Luis was at bay too, elbow deep in a transmission. "Boss?" he said, surprised. "We weren't expecting you till Monday." Plans changed. He wiped his hands. "Everything okay?" I hesitated. "Getting there." He nodded like he understood more than I said. "Mrs. Chen's coming in at noon. Still having issues with that Civic." I laughed under my breath. That car. It had been patched more times than I could count. "Tell her I'll take a look personally." Luis grinned and went back to work. I stood there a moment longer, watching the team move. Grease under fingernails, sockets clinking against concrete, the rhythm of men building things with their hands. This was what I'd created, what I'd sacrificed for. And for years I'd thought I was preserving it for Mason. But I wasn't. I was preserving it for whoever came next. That afternoon, I met with my accountant and finalized the foundation in Sarah's name. The scholarship program would begin with 3 students a year, full tuition for vocational or trade school. No essays, no polished resumes. Just interviews, hard questions, and heart. The kind of students Mason never had to compete with. The kind Sarah would have championed. That night, I stood in my living room and stared at our family photo, the one from Mason's Little League days. Sarah smiling, young and tired. Mason holding a bat too big for his hands. Me in the middle, already graying, already worried. I reached out and straightened the frame. "I kept my promise," I whispered to her. "I gave him everything, but I can't give him anymore." And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I'd failed her. The letter came 3 days later. Plain envelope. No return address. The kind of cheap stationery they hand out in holding cells. 5 handwritten pages. Mason's handwriting was still the same. Tight, slanted forward like he was always trying to outrun the words. I read it once, then I read it again, slower. It was what you'd expect. Apologies wrapped in excuses. Regret laced with manipulation. A plea for understanding buried inside a pitch to reconsider the will. I panicked. You backed me into a corner. I never meant to go that far. Prison will ruin my life. He didn't ask how I was doing, not once. Didn't mention what it must have felt like to wake up alone in the wilderness with nothing but wind and fear in your lungs. Didn't say my name. He only said Dad at the top and please at the end. I fed it into the shredder. Quietly. No ceremony. No second thoughts. Some relationships don't survive attempted murder, no matter how much money you've invested in them. That night, I slept like I hadn't in years. No dreams, no ghosts, just silence. A few days later, I visited Sarah's grave. Lakeview Cemetery overlooking the Sound. Same stone bench I sat on the day we buried her. Same cherry tree. Same bird song that never seemed to match the season. I brought her one of those awful gas station bouquets. Orange lilies, baby's breath, wrapped in plastic. She used to joke that ugly flowers lasted longer. I stood there in the cold and told her everything. About the hike, about the trap, about how I made it out, and who I'd found waiting on the other side. I didn't cry, I just talked, like I used to when she was in chemo and couldn't sleep. It felt good to say it out loud, to let someone know, someone who mattered, that I'd finally stopped trying to fix what couldn't be fixed. As I stood to leave, a gust of wind knocked the bouquet off the bench. I picked it up and saw a loose petal stuck to the headstone. I brushed it away with my thumb, slow and deliberate, like smoothing the crease from a memory. I'm going to be okay, I told her. And I meant it. Walking back to the truck, I felt something unfamiliar. Not relief, not joy, just room. Room for the life I still had. Room for whatever came next. A week after I got back, I found myself standing in front of the community college bulletin board near Pike and 15th. It smelled like burnt espresso and rain, like every Seattle hallway this time of year. Tacked between flyers for missing cats and beginner yoga was a handwritten ad. Autotech 101, instructor needed evening class. Must know transmissions, carburetors, and have patience for beginners. Pay's not great, but stories welcome. Claudia, room 213. I don't know why it caught my eye. Maybe because it didn't promise anything. Maybe because it asked for something simple. Patience. I took the tab and texted the number. 20 minutes later, I was in room 213 with a woman in a denim jacket and grease under her fingernails. You actually showed up, she said, not looking up from her clipboard. I usually do. Claudia glanced at me, then my hands. You work? Harper Automotive. She whistled. Big time. Why the hell are you volunteering for this? I shrugged. Maybe I got tired of building things for people who never learned to fix anything themselves. She stared at me a second too long. You're hired. That night, I taught my first class. 4 students. 1 busted Civic engine mounted on a frame, half a donut box, and a broken torque wrench someone taped together with faith. I didn't lecture. I handed out socket sets and told them to find out what a seized bearing feels like. By the end of the hour, 2 of them had oil on their eyebrows, and 1 girl named Nia had the exact same look in her eyes that I used to see in Sarah when she solved something no one else could. It hit me all at once. This was how it was supposed to feel. Not flashy, not dramatic, just useful. And real. After class, I walked back to my truck in the dark, rain seeping down my collar. I didn't even flinch. Seattle rain is a quiet thing. It doesn't shout. It just keeps showing up, like forgiveness, like understanding, like a second life if you're lucky. I drove home with the window cracked, letting the night in. The old family photo still sat on the mantel, but something in it felt settled now. Like the glass had stopped trembling. I passed it without touching it. Some memories aren't meant to be held anymore. They're meant to be left in peace. By early April, the scholarship fund was fully operational. I signed the final paperwork in a modest law office off Queen Anne Avenue. Nothing fancy, just a few old diplomas on the wall, a bowl of butterscotch candies no one ever touched, and a sharp woman named Janelle who didn't waste time with small talk. She handed me a copy of the trust documents. "The Sarah Harper Foundation for Applied Trades," she said. "Beautiful name." "Fitting," I replied. Sarah always believed in people who worked with their hands. She used to say intelligence didn't always wear a suit. Sometimes it came covered in engine grease and dreams. 3 students had already been selected. One was a single mom learning HVAC repair. Another was a kid from Rainier Beach rebuilding his first transmission in his garage. The third, a recent vet trying to get certified in diesel systems. I read their applications that night over a cup of tea, sitting in the shop's break room, boots kicked up on the old vending machine. Every line felt like closure, not because it erased the past, but because it gave it purpose. Mason never called again. No more letters, no requests for forgiveness, just silence. I didn't chase it. Some bridges once burned are meant to stay ash. Detective Martinez called to inform me of the trial date. "It'll be a closed hearing," she said, "due to the nature of the crime and his plea." "He pleaded?" I asked. She sighed. "Guilty to reduced charges." His lawyer knew the evidence was airtight. Attempted murder, inheritance fraud, abandonment in a known danger zone. Alaska law doesn't take kindly to premeditated wilderness exposure. I didn't ask what his sentence would be. It wouldn't change anything. A few nights later, I went back to the motel room in my mind, the one where I sat across from my son and realized he didn't see me as a father anymore. Just a number, a signature, an obstacle. But that room wasn't just where something ended. It's where something else began. The quiet work of repair, of self-respect, of letting go. That's the thing about revenge, real revenge. It's not loud. It doesn't show up with fists or flames. It shows up in the calm, in the life you build after, in the dignity of walking forward when someone tried to leave you behind. 2 months after the trial, I got a call from the local high school. The voice on the other end was hesitant, polite. One of the counselors had heard about the scholarship fund. "Word's gotten around," she said, and wanted to know if I'd be willing to come speak to a group of seniors. Not about the money, about the work, trades, grit. Life after the easy path disappears. I almost said no. Public speaking wasn't my thing, and I wasn't in the mood to become anyone's mascot for perseverance. But something about the way she asked, like she expected me to turn her down, made me pause. "I'll be there," I said. So, the following Thursday, I found myself standing in a gymnasium that smelled like waxed floors and hormone-fueled tension. Maybe 50 kids sat in metal chairs arranged in rows, slouched like every teenager does when they're told to listen. I didn't prepare a speech. I just told them the truth. Told them I'd built an auto shop from nothing. Told them I'd worked 18-hour days when Sarah was dying because bills didn't wait for grief. Told them that sometimes being a man meant showing up even when no one clapped. I didn't talk about Mason, but I did talk about entitlement, how it sneaks in when people hand you too much and ask too little. I said, there's no shame in learning a skill and getting paid for doing it well. No shame in fixing what's broken, especially if that thing is yourself. A few kids nodded. Most stayed quiet. But when I was leaving, a girl with engine grease under her fingernails caught up to me by the parking lot. "You really own Harper Auto?" "I do." "You ever hire kids with no experience?" "Only if they've got stubborn hands." She smiled. "I'm stubborn." That Monday, I hired her part-time. Naya, same girl from the community college night class. She swept the shop like her boots were glued to the floor. Asked 100 questions a day. Watched me work like I was a puzzle she wanted to solve. And I let her. I didn't hand her anything, didn't make promises. But I saw something in her I hadn't seen in a long time. Hunger, humility, hope. The kind of foundation I used to believe Mason could build on. The kind I almost gave up believing in. Spring rolled into early summer, and the shop found its rhythm again. We'd repainted the office, fixed the leaky sink in the break room, even replaced the old radio that only got one AM station and sounded like it was coughing more than playing music. Naya showed up early every shift, asked questions about torque specs and brake bleeds and why the Civic she was working on kept idling rough no matter what she tried. I caught her once staring at an old photo I kept above the shop desk. Me, Sarah, and Mason, back when he was 10. We were at a Mariners game. Mason wore a glove 3 sizes too big and an oversized grin. "That your kid?" she asked. "Was," I said. She didn't press, just nodded like she understood what I meant without needing it spelled out. That's when I realized how much things had shifted. There was a time when silence in the shop felt like grief, a heavy, airless thing. Now it felt like space, like breathing room. I'd stopped listening for Mason's voice in the hallway, stopped waiting for some miraculous turn, some apology, some return to the sun I used to know. Instead, I poured that space into rebuilding what I had control over. The team, the business, myself. One night after close, I found an envelope taped to the door. No return address. Just my name, scrawled in thick marker. For a second, I thought, maybe Mason had sent something, a real letter. No tricks, no ask. Inside was a photo, not of him, of me, from the newspaper. A small article about the scholarship fund's first class of recipients. Someone had circled a quote in red ink. "We don't need more heirs, we need more builders." No signature. I stood there in the doorway for a long time. Was it him? I couldn't say. Maybe it didn't matter. Maybe the truth wasn't in the sender. It was in the silence that followed, because for once I didn't feel pulled backward. I just felt forward. A few weeks later, I took Oliver up on his offer. Flew back to Alaska, not for revenge, not for closure. Just to camp. To feel cold air in my lungs and snow under my boots without the weight of betrayal pressing between my shoulder blades. We didn't talk much. Men like us don't have to. But on the last night, beside a small fire under a sky so full of stars it looked torn open, Oliver asked, "You ever think about telling your story?" "This is telling it," I said. He nodded, and we listened to the quiet. That night under the Alaskan stars, something let go in me. Not loudly, not all at once, just unhooked. Maybe it was the crackle of the fire, the smell of pine smoke in my clothes, or the way the cold air made every breath feel earned. Or maybe it was the realization that I didn't have to carry Mason's shadow anymore. For years, I'd built my life around the idea of preparing him for the world. Sacrificed, bent, softened, always trying to protect him from the fall. But that's not how character is formed. It's formed when you get up after the fall, not by someone cushioning you from it. I spent decades believing I could shape him with love alone. Turns out love without boundaries is just a leash disguised as a lifeline. We broke camp the next morning. Oliver handed me a folded map before we parted ways. "In case you ever want to come back without needing saving." I shook his hand. "Next time, I'll bring the coffee." When I got back to Seattle, the shop was humming. Nia had reorganized the tool wall, alphabetized the oil filters, and even fixed the flickering light in the storage closet. Luis grinned when I walked in. "Boss, she's basically running the place." "She should," I said. "She's earned it." I pulled Nia aside after lunch. "You ever think about doing this long term?" I asked. "Mechanic work?" "More than that. Managing, leading, owning." She blinked. "Me?" "You've got the hands. More importantly, you've got the heart. She looked down at her boots like she didn't trust what she was hearing. Start small, I said. Inventory control, ordering, hiring the next version of you. A quiet smile crept across her face. You serious? As a head gasket failure. And just like that, I saw it. The shift. The inheritance I'd once meant for Mason, now reimagined in something better. Not blood, but legacy. Not entitlement, but trust earned over time. Later that night, I stood outside the shop and watched Nia lock up. She didn't notice me. She just jiggled the knob, double-checked it, then walked to her car with the keys clipped to her belt. Just like I used to. Just like Sarah used to. And for the first time since that motel room in Denali, I let myself smile without the ache of what could have been. Because what was right here, right now, was enough. Summer passed quietly. The shop ran smooth. The scholarship committee met quarterly, and my nights were filled with slower things. Dog-eared books, black coffee, long walks through my old neighborhood where the trees hung heavy with early dusk. No drama, no explosions, just life. Some days I'd catch myself reaching for my phone, half expecting Mason's name to pop up on the screen. Not because I wanted it to, just because habits die slow. But it never did. I'd heard through my attorney that Mason had been transferred to a minimum security facility just outside Fairbanks. No visitors requested, no appeals filed. He was serving a reduced sentence somewhere between 8 to 12 years, depending on behavior and program credits. It sounded distant, sterile. Like a consequence being lived out in a parallel life. I didn't ask for updates. I didn't need them. Instead, I focused on what could still be repaired. I called my sister back in Montana, someone I hadn't spoken to in years because grief had made us strangers after Sarah's funeral. We talked for over an hour, about nothing and everything. About Sarah, about crops, about aging knees and stubborn pride. It felt good, like finding a room in your house you thought was bricked up forever. I reconnected with a few Navy buddies, too. Went to a reunion I'd always avoided. No name tags, just memory. We laughed about old rations, bad haircuts, and the one guy who used to steal hot sauce packets from base kitchens like they were gold. I didn't mention Mason. No one asked. They could see it in my eyes. That quiet space grief leaves behind when it's no longer bleeding. Just scarred. By October, I was sleeping through the night, not dreaming of snow, not dreaming of truck engines fading into wilderness, just dreaming about what might come next. And one evening, as I swept the shop floor after closing, I realized something simple and undeniable. I was no longer waiting for healing. I had found it, not all at once, but piece by piece. In the hum of fluorescent lights, in Nia's laughter echoing from the garage, in the peace of knowing I had nothing left to prove, and still everything left to give. I got an email in November from a local nonprofit, a youth mentorship program that had heard about the Sarah Harper Scholarship. They wanted me to speak, not just about trade work, but about legacy. About how to build something that lasts even after the worst happens. I hesitated. Talking about engines was easy. Torque specs, fluid levels, part numbers, clean, precise, no emotion required. But this meant opening the door. Still, I said yes. The event was small. Maybe 20 people in a dimly lit rec center just off Rainier Avenue. Folding chairs, styrofoam cups of coffee. Someone had baked banana bread that didn't rise. I stood in front of a whiteboard and said what I knew. That life will hand you people you think are yours. Blood, family, sons. And sometimes they'll betray you in ways you didn't think possible. And when they do, you'll ask yourself whether it was your fault. Whether you failed them. Whether love was supposed to be enough. I told them love is enough, but only the kind that holds firm. The kind that says no. The kind that teaches, not just gives. I lost my son, I said, but I found myself. A woman in the back cried softly. Afterward, a young man approached me, maybe 19, skin like mine, scar above his eyebrow. He looked at me like I was someone worth listening to. "My dad's in prison," he said. "Always told me I'd end up like him." "You don't have to." "How?" "Start by fixing something," I said. "Could be an alternator, could be a broken story. Either way, start with your hands." He nodded. Not a big nod. Just enough. And I left feeling lighter. Not proud, not heroic, just useful. That's all I ever wanted, I think. To matter, not because of what I could give, but because of what I could build. The shop had taught me that. Sarah had taught me that. Even Mason, in his own broken, brutal way, had taught me that. Because when someone tries to bury you and you stand up anyway, that's not just survival, that's a new beginning. By the time December rolled in, the shop had started decorating for Christmas. Nia brought in a tiny fake tree and strung it with socket wrenches instead of ornaments. Luis wrapped garland around the parts shelves and pretended not to care. Someone even taped a Santa hat to the break room coffee machine, which now hissed like it resented the attention. I watched it all quietly, letting the warmth of it settle. It had been a long time since this season felt like something more than a reminder of absence. Sarah had loved Christmas. Homemade cookies, off-key carols, handwritten notes tucked into gifts with terrible wrapping jobs. After she died, the holiday became more chore than joy. Something I endured for Mason's sake. Now the joy had crept back in, soft and unannounced, like the sound of someone you trust unlocking the door. On Christmas Eve, I closed the shop early, made rounds one last time, checking the bay doors, unplugging the compressor, switching off the overheads. Before I left, I walked over to the photo of Sarah I kept on my desk, just her in the garden, laughing with a smudge of dirt on her cheek. "I kept going," I said softly. "You were right. Love doesn't save someone who doesn't want saving, but it still leaves something behind." I locked the office and stepped into the cold. The street was quiet, except for wind and distant lights blinking through misted glass storefronts. And in that stillness, I realized I didn't hate Mason. I didn't wish him pain or ruin or even regret. I just didn't owe him anything anymore. Not guilt, not money, not forgiveness. He'd made his choices, and I'd made mine. And now we lived with them, separately, completely. I got into my truck and drove through the old neighborhoods past the places where we'd once trick-or-treated, where Sarah had picked out pumpkins, where Mason hit his first Little League home run. None of it made me ache the way it used to. It just felt like a book I'd finished, one I could finally put down. Because this new chapter, this quiet, unflashy, completely ordinary chapter, was mine. And I had no intention of wasting it. The year turned over without ceremony. No resolutions, no champagne. Just a cold morning, a hot cup of black coffee, and the sound of the shop heater rattling to life like it always did. I walked in through the side entrance. The bell jingled, same as ever. Nia was already there. Flannel sleeves rolled, boots muddy, fingers deep in the wiring of a stubborn ignition system. "Morning, boss," she said, not looking up. "Morning, partner," I said back. She smiled at that. We worked in silence for a while. Not awkward, not strained, just the kind of silence that comes when everything you need to say has already been lived through. At lunch, she slid a small box across the workbench. Wrapped in brown paper, no ribbon. "What's this?" I asked. "You'll see." Inside was a key. Shop key, polished, clean, identical to mine. "You're serious?" she asked, eyes narrowing like she didn't want to hope too much. "Dead serious. You've earned it." She blinked fast, then nodded, just once. That night, I updated the shop records. Named her as successor in the operating agreement. Filed it with the state. No press release, no ceremony, just paper and truth and legacy. Mason never came back, never wrote. Last I heard, he'd taken a vocational class inside the facility. Auto repair, ironically. Maybe it stuck. Maybe not. That wasn't my story anymore. Mine was right here, in socket sets and service bays, in students who didn't think college was their only shot, in tools passed down, not just through blood, but through effort. I still visited Sarah's grave once a month, told her about the new hires, the scholarship recipients, the way the shop's floor never quite stayed clean, no matter how many times we mopped it. And I always told her the same thing before I left. I kept my promise. Not to Mason, to her, to myself, to the idea that what we build, brick by brick, wrench by wrench, word by word, matters more than what we leave behind. Because justice isn't always a courtroom. Sometimes it's just the quiet sound of getting up again, and choosing to live a life you'd be proud of if no one ever saw it. That's what I did, and that's what I'm still doing. Thank you for listening. If this story spoke to you, quietly or sharply, I'd be honored if you left a thought below or passed it on to someone who might need it. Take care of your hands, take care of your time, and take care of your story.